With all the moving parts inside the Big 12, one thing remains certain. Coach Chris Klieman is not going anywhere anytime soon.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. You can find us free and available everywhere you get your favorite podcast and on YouTube. Go ahead and click that like, subscribe button. We are getting close to 600 subscribers. We have a big February coming up on the show. Before we get started, I got plenty to talk about in today's show to get us to the weekend, but today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. We're going to get into a small weekend conversation about the basketball team, kind of look ahead and think if they can continue this momentum. We're going to get to that. I want to talk a little Senior Bowl because this weekend has a Kansas State Wildcat playing college football. Look at that. February 1st, and Kansas State's playing football, at least somewhat. We're going to talk about that. But first, I want to get down to a report that came out earlier this week discussing a few coaches in the conference. And it got me thinking about the conference as a whole, and I wanted to share my thoughts with you all. Earlier this week, there was a report that came out basically discussing the hot seat of all the coaches in college football. On3 reported it by Andy Staples. He put out a really nice report, really nice thought process, if you will, in his blog post and discussed who he believed was on the hot seat. When it came to the Big 12, he discussed three different coaches. Now, for the record, Chris Klieman was not one of the three discussed, but what was on there was who he believed was on the hot seat for the Big 12. And he discussed two coaches, and two of them were Cincinnati's coach and as well Scott Satterfield, as well as Arizona's coach Brent Brennan. I agree with both of those. I think they're both on the hot seat. He also discussed Mike Gundy of Oklahoma State. He said that he is possibly on the hot seat, but could be too expensive to fire. He put that in parentheses and said maybe, which I thought was interesting because of all the things that happened with Mike Gundy over the offseason and, of course, the dreadful season that the Cowboys had this past season. But it got me thinking, with all of the changes and crazy things happening in the Big 12, one thing has remained constant over the years, even at least over the last 6 years, and that is Chris Klieman has been one of the best coaches in the Big 12 conference. And in my opinion, I believe he is the most safe coach in the entire conference. If you had to put a list of unfirables, I would put him at number one. I think there's a couple coaches that come close to him, including Kenny Dillingham of Arizona State, a team that just went to the college football playoffs. We can talk about that in just a minute. And I think Kalani Sitake of BYU would probably be involved in that as well. So if you want us to play the 1A, 1B, 1C game, I don't think I would argue with you too much, but there's no doubt that you cannot remove the number one away from Chris Klieman when discussing with unfirables inside this conference. There has been no other coach in this conference to win 8 games or more over his tenure, with the exception of the 2020 season, which we shouldn't really count. The only bad year that Kansas State had was the COVID year, and that year was a bust. I mean, let's just be honest. Let's keep it real. That 4-6 season, 2020, we all know. I don't have to explain what 2020 was to us in the world, right? When you see 2020 and you see a record and it just doesn't make sense, it's an outlier. It deserves the asterisk. There's no doubt about that. Every other year that Coach Klieman has had for Kansas State, 8-5 in 2019, 8-5 in 2021, 10-4 in a Big 12 championship in 2022, and then 9-4 in both 2023 and this past season in 2024. He's 3-2 in bowl games. He has a conference championship under his belt. And might I remind you, that conference championship in 2022 was when Oklahoma and Texas was still in this conference, when many people believe the thought process thinking that the conference was stronger at that point. I tend to disagree. I think we are getting stronger now with the more amount of teams building. I think that it's just not looked upon because of, unfortunately, the TV deals that are across the other conferences. But I think the Big 12 is in a much better spot right now than it was a couple years ago. But in the idea of saying that you won a Big 12 conference with Texas, with Oklahoma still in the mix, that should give just another check mark, another green sign, another good feeling, a warm and fuzzy, if you will, for saying Chris Klieman is a fantastic coach. So this is why I think that by no means he is on the hot seat. And I don't think you even have the conversation of thinking he's on the hot seat. It just brought to my attention after reading some of these Big 12 teams of how lucky we are to have this type of coaching on Kansas State. And we've been blessed with very good coaching in the past with Bill Snyder and everything that he did. And obviously they named an entire football stadium after him. I don't have to remind you how great Bill Snyder was. But moving on, you have to have this feeling, and we're seeing it with Alabama. We're seeing it with a couple other places across the nation that you have shoes to fill. And it's a very hard task to do, even if you're not the immediate predecessor to a legendary coach like Bill Snyder. And in this case, Chris Klieman that wasn't the case. Now, at least for Bill Snyder in his long tenure, right? Not 2.0. I think that he's doing a fantastic job in this. And what he's done over the last couple seasons, 48-28 on his entire career at Kansas State, 31-23 in conference record. In his entire career, he has 120 wins and only 41 losses. And again, with 48 of them being in Big 12 play or in Big 12 land with Kansas State, right? It's really impressive what he is doing as a head coach of this football team. And I think he's only getting better. I think that we are just touching the surface. Now, he officially has ended his first contract. Now, it was extended, so it has pushed on. But if you look at the initial report, he was signed for a 6-year deal, and that 6-year deal was giving him about 2.3, almost $2.5 million per year. They had an annual raise of about $200,000 per year of those 6 years. He just finished his 6th season, so if things went astray, we would be right now this offseason on a head coaching. We would be looking for a new head coach. But thankfully, in 2023, there was an extension, and he is our head coach at least through the 2030 season. And they did up his pay as well. I think it went up to about $5.5 million per year. So that's where Coach Klieman is in aspects of his contract, if you weren't sure. If you look back to that head coaching search when they went for it in 2018, after the 2018 season, and they picked up Chris Klieman to start the 2019 season and beyond. If you remember some of the other head coaching top candidates at that time, Troy's head coach, Neil Brown, who went to West Virginia, who was fired at the end of this season for West Virginia. That one didn't really work out quite well. If you look at Memphis's coach, Mike Norvell, he went to Florida State, had a great season last year, should have went to the college football playoffs. Probably one of the biggest reasons they expanded because of this whole talk with Florida State. But this past season wasn't very good. Now he's right back on the hot seat, if you will, with Mike Norvell. Oregon's defensive coach, Jim Leavitt, who was a former assistant at Kansas State. There was a possibility that he went there. But they went with North Dakota State, Chris Klieman, who showed that he had the ability to win the big thing. Can he get there with Kansas State? Can he get this team to another Big 12 conference championship and get them into the Big 12 or get them in, to the college football playoffs? I think this is the year we see Kansas State as one of those 12 teams battling for a national championship when it all is said and done, when after the ball drops for 2026 and they have a national championship, they have a college football playoff, we're going to see Kansas State being one of those 12 teams when it's all said and done. Mark my words, it's going to happen. And I think it's going to be against BYU in the Big 12 championship. That's where I'm leaning. I know it's way too early to decide the opponent, but I do think that Kansas State is going to be one of those two teams when it's all said and done. We got plenty to talk about more as the offseason rolls around with this, but I just had to discuss this as we're heading into the weekend and hopefully have a great weekend for Wildcat Nation across just everything when it comes to basketball with the Senior Bowl. And we're going to get to all that talk here in just a minute. I wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about this coaching staff because the momentum hasn't been any higher, any bigger than it is right now over the past couple seasons. Since the Big 12 championship in 2022, I feel like the momentum for this team hasn't peaked, hasn't been any better than it is right now. Since that moment, heading into this offseason, what we've done with the recruiting class, what we've done with the transfer portal, going into a new season with, in my opinion, the odds of winning a Big 12 championship has never been higher. Now, although this was an interesting piece by On3 talking about certain things in the hot seat, I don't always agree with that website, and I will make sure to let you know when I don't. For example, they had a predicted college football playoffs, and they had Utah as the Big 12 player. Now, they did have Utah being a first-round bye, and I think that was I think they were right there putting the Big 12 as one of the bye teams, but the team that they chose was wrong. It's going to be Kansas State in the college football playoffs. And for the record, we're going to have at least two teams from the Big 12 making it in the college football playoffs. That's where On3 was wrong again. It will not be Utah. I'm going to go with my predictions, and I think it's going to be Kansas State and BYU in the college football playoffs for the Big 12 in the 2025/26 season. That's where I'm going to go with this one. But we got plenty more college football to talk about, and we get to see a former Kansas State Wildcat play in the Senior Bowl on Saturday. Let's discuss what you should be looking for and what you should be hoping for a guy like Jacob Parrish in the Senior Bowl on Saturday, right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, attending the NFL playoffs is really an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans is just unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live. It's a memory I will never forget. Now that the Super Bowl is here and other things are in the air as well, like college football getting close to March Madness, you can use GameTime to make it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, GameTime Picks. It filters out all the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters most, being there. The best part, guess what? You pick your seat and it is the price that you pay. No more being bamboozled at the checkout line. When you finish that shopping cart, click add the cart. That is the price you will pay. No added fees after choosing your selection. It is the best feeling in the world knowing that if you're getting a $150 ticket on something, when you go to checkout, it's not $250 because those added fees. Also, knowing that my ticket is backed with the Game Time guarantee gives me that complete peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCollege, $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Hey, for your second listen today, check out Locked On Big 12, covering everything in the Big 12 Conference. Drake Cole has you covered over there, so check that out for your second listen. We just discussed how I believe that Coach Chris Klieman is the most unfireable coach in the Big 12. I think that is a done fact. And I think if you have a problem with that, let me know in the comments. Actually, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one. Speaking of college football, though, I love that we're going to talk college football at the end of January right here. And we're going to continue to talk about more college football in the month of February. We got a huge month for you lined up. We're going to make sure that we're talking about this Wildcats roster almost every single day of the week. And we're going to make sure that we have you covered here to get you prepared all the way up until Dublin. But with that being said, the Reese's Senior Bowl is here on Saturday in Mobile, Alabama at the University of South Alabama. Is going to be the Reese's Senior Bowl, and former Wildcats cornerback Jacob Parrish will be playing in this game. The game is going to be kicking off at 1:30 Central Time, and it will be available on NFL Network on Saturday. It's going to be really fun to watch Jacob Parrish play. I was paying attention to some of the media and some of the videos of them being posted him on about his one-on-ones and his practices that he's had so far in Mobile. And I think overall he looks really good. I think he has a really great opportunity to show what he's made of and rise his draft stock. I think there's a really strong chance that we could hear Jacob Parrish's name, especially if he has a great game on Saturday. And then obviously that'll probably turn into a combine invite. But there is a really strong opportunity for him to be at least a third round pick. I think we could potentially see him move up to second round. That might be a little bit of a stretch, maybe late second, but I think it's safe to think that we are going to see Jacob Parrish be drafted in the top 100 when it's all said and done. And I feel good about saying that. Matt Miller, NFL Draft Scout. You can see him on Twitter at NFL Draft Scout, which is funny. He's an NFL draft expert and analysis and insider, and puts out really good stuff. And he put something out earlier this month saying that he's a big fan of Jacob Parrish, really likes, although he's an undersized and not huge, he really likes that he's tough at the line of scrimmage, limits targets with his closing speed, and thinks he can be a slot in the pros, slot corner. He split his time at Kansas State at that spot. And what I've seen and what we've seen that Jacob Parrish, he's an absolute dog. We know that he can play really good at the line of scrimmage. He mentioned earlier this month, he said, I wouldn't be surprised if he left Mobile with a top 75 grade. That would put him exactly where I'm thinking, would put him in the middle of the third round if everything worked out positional wise for the NFL draft. Now, it never works out that way. You have players that have a top 75 grade that fall below that 75 mark because you have GMs and front offices reaching on certain players, liking certain players. They don't want to make a trade. Or you can have a player that has a top 75 grade get drafted even sooner. We've seen that happen multiple times. We saw a punter getting drafted in the first round years ago. I think it was to the Raiders, right? John Gruden era. So with that being said, I do think we will see Jacob Parrish being drafted in the third round, but it'll all happen and it'll all come down to how he performs in this game and how he performs at the combine. There's going to be a lot of things that come into play. Regardless of the fact, I think his skills will translate very well in the professional league, and we're going to have another great Kansas State Wildcat player to cheer on Sundays. We already have another Super Bowl player on the Kansas City Chiefs playing with Felix on next Sunday for the Chiefs. So really excited to see that. And obviously we have a couple Dallas Cowboys with Cooper Beebe being a great rookie season this past year. We have, Deuce Vaughn hopefully getting some more playing time. So there's a lot of obviously some really good playing for Kansas State in the pros, and Jacob Parrish easily can be that next one. I wish that we would have saw DJ Giddens play the Senior Bowl. I was actually quite surprised we did not see him play, but we'll probably see him play on Sundays as well. No doubt about that. But I think when it's all said and done, I think we will have Jacob Parrish be the first Kansas State Wildcat off the board in the NFL draft. When some mocks and stuff come out with some certain teams and things across that line, we'll talk about that in segments in the coming months, all the way up until April's draft. He did meet with 13 teams, according to Easton Butler of social media. He is a Packers draft visits and meeting writer for Packer Report. So, of course, the Green Bay Packers were on that list. But also, he met with teams like the San Francisco 49ers, Buffalo Bills, the New Orleans Saints, the Carolina Panthers, the Rams, Chargers, Broncos, Ravens, Cowboys, Bears, Eagles, and, of course, he met with the Kansas City Chiefs. Jacob Parrish is a Kansas City Chief. Would you like to see that? You think he'd fit the bill on Andy Reid's Kansas City Chiefs? Steve Spagnuolo and Jacob Parrish with all those interesting line of scrimmage blitzes. I mean, count me in. I would love to see that, to be completely honest. But with that being said, it's all got to start in Mobile, and that's one of their biggest things. The draft starts in Mobile, and that's what Jacob Parrish is about to do to represent Kansas State on Saturday. So check that out on NFL Network. Should be a really good game, and we'll probably have some sort of content on the channel talking about that, maybe in a short form. We'll talk about his performance later on this week. Let's wrap up this show talking about how Kansas State can continue their momentum this weekend in arguably one of the biggest games of the year for the rest of the season for the men's team as they take on Iowa State, a very tough team. We'll do that to finish up this show right here on Locked On Kansas State. And let's finish up this show. Let's put a bow on it right here on Locked On Kansas State. And it's going to be a tough one. The Wildcats are going to take on the Cyclones. And if it's anything like we just saw the women's team, it's going to be a very good game. Now, if you didn't check that out, check out my latest live reaction show that came out on Thursday night. The women's team defeated Iowa State in overtime. It was a very good game. It was a statement win. It was a win that showed that they can do this without a Yoka Lee. Now, it's for the men's term. It's their term to see if they can defeat a team that is, one, ranked 5th in the country, and 2, get their first road win of the year. It's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. But what they've played over the last couple games, their ranked win against West Virginia and their most recent win against Oklahoma State, can they shock the world and defeat the Cyclones in Ames? Can that happen? Can their first road win of the season be against a top 5 team in the country? Here's where my mind sits. I don't think you have to win this game to still prove that you are improving, to still show that you're improving on the season. Now, obviously, if you win this game and you prove an absolute statement, then I think we have a completely different narrative for the rest of the year. If Jerome Tang brings this team into Ames, and with the play of Doug McDaniel as of late, with Coleman Hawkins as of late, with the way that Hassan has been shooting the 3-point, with the way that this team with both Joneses have been absolutely just outstanding, hopefully an improved David Castillo off the bench. If you can find a way to steal this win, and quite frankly, it would be a stolen win, just the way that Kansas State has performed this year. But if you can find a way to do it, we have to start talking differently about this team. It won't be more of a has Kansas State turned the corner. It will be that they are on Main Street and they are working their way towards a potential tournament berth. If you can defeat Iowa State on the road, it would be a quad 1 win, a very impressive quad 1 win on the road. And it would take some of those non-conference losses and kind of push them to the side, because you'd have multiple ranked wins on the season. This would be obviously your most impressive. And then looking forward to the rest of the conference and how you've started to build this winning streak, things would start to change a little bit. Now, it wouldn't obviously put them on the bubble right away, but it would start to put their name back in the conversation. And if they can continue that momentum and move on, it would be absolutely huge. Now, let's get a little realistic here. They haven't won a game on the road all year. And Iowa State is a really good team, with their only losses coming by single points and really just being absolute devastating losses, like heartbreaking losses, if you will. Their most recent loss was on the road to Arizona, and it took Arizona a magical shot by Caleb Love to send it to overtime. And then Arizona just woke up and took off in overtime to beat Iowa State on the road for their second loss. And I think their other loss was a 1-point loss to West Virginia. Other than that, Iowa State has been amazing, have been lights out. They have been very good all season long. And they're just coming off that loss to Arizona. Now they're back home and they take on a red-hot Kansas State team. It's going to be a really good game. It all comes down to those first 4 minutes. We've just seen Kansas State step up over the last couple games and do really well early in matchups. And that has set them up for 2 straight wins, including one against a ranked West Virginia squad. Now they're on the road, going back to the same type of conversation that we were just a few Saturdays ago in Lawrence when we were down 14-0 after 4 minutes on the road against the Jayhawks. You cannot let that happen again when you're in Ames. Those first 4 minutes are going to be absolute paramount, and it's going to decide how Kansas State can handle the rest of the game. It all comes down to 4 minutes. That's it. If you can keep this team intact, the Cyclones intact for the first 4 minutes, you have a chance. You absolutely have a chance. You keep David Gasson out of foul trouble. You limit the turnovers. You find a way to be in contention. You don't have to win it because that's a really tough thing for this team to do, but you find a way to keep it in contention to win or be close in the rebounding game. You have a chance. There's a lot of ifs. There's a lot of things that must go right. But I'm feeling a lot better right now about the chances of this team winning this game on Saturday than I did just about a week ago. It's possible. Go ahead and cue that little that clip of Angels in the outfield, of that little kid telling me, so you're telling me there's a chance that, hey, it can happen? Start flapping those wings, because I think it absolutely can. We'll see what happens in this matchup. Kansas State taking on Iowa State should be a really good one. That's going to wrap it up for this episode of Locked On Kansas State. Do me a favor, hit that like, hit that subscribe, and leave me your score predictions for Kansas State in Iowa State for this weekend in the comment description below. Let's see who's close. Whoever's the closest, I will, let's see, what will I do? I'll shout you out on either the live post game or on Monday's episode when we discuss Jerome Tang's press conference. Or maybe how about both? We'll do it right there. I'll shout you out whoever's the closest. So leave your comment in the comment description below. If you haven't already, hit subscribe. And until then, this has been Locked On Kansas State.